Today we're going to do a boot review. It's a bit of a comparison between 4 popular Crispi models. Before I get started, I do want to say it's tough to do a boot review. I mean, you don't see a lot of them on YouTube for a reason. Everybody's foot is so different that it's really hard to give our opinions and say that it's going to matter to you. Take this all with a grain of salt. That being said, Forrest and I have put a lot of miles on these boots, and we're going to give you our opinions.
2 things from me. These reviews are always unpaid. And then secondly, you're probably wondering why there's 2 folks up here providing this review. Well, the reason is it's very difficult, if not impossible, for any one person to test 4 pairs of boots extensively in a short period of time. So that's why you'll see both of us here today. But that being said, I'll jump into the specifications that are the Lapponia III. Now, backtracking just for a moment, the Lapponia III was mine, as well as the Briksdal Mtn GTX, and Brady covered the Altitude GTX and the Briksdal Pro. So specifications for the Lapponia III. This is the light and fast flexible model of a boot for early season applications made by Crispi. This is a 1 pound 5 ounce boot per boot. It's also a Flex 2 on a scale of 1 to 5, so very flexible. It's uninsulated and it's at a price point of $340. It's also 8 inches tall. Now to talk to the fabrics, the outsole is the proprietary Crispi Mega Grip outsole. The actual midsole is their EV8 midsole. This is a leather ran with poly coating. This is nubuck leather, and this is a synthetic material which is called Pewtech. So that pretty much wraps up the specifications of the Lapponia III.
Then I'll jump into the Altitude. This is going to be a similar boot to the Lapponia III, but with a couple differences. Number 1 is it's a little bit stiffer. So you're looking at a 2.5 flex rating versus a 2. The second one is you're going to be a little heavier. It's going to be 1 pound 8 ounces versus 1 pound 5 ounces. This one does come in at $365, so it's also a little more expensive. In terms of materials used, it is got the same outsole. It's got a slightly stiffer midsole that you'll see, and it's also slightly heavier. You're going to have a very similar poly-coated leather rand, and then you've got leather on the upper in a few areas, as well as synthetic for a lot of this. And so that's going to keep it breathable. I believe this is a little more breathable than the Lapponia III, and it is still going to have that Gore-Tex liner, so you are going to be waterproof as well. They are both going to be an 8-inch boot, and neither of them have Crispi's ABSS ankle bone support system.
So, talking to some personal experiences and testimony with the Lapponia III. This boot has a lot of miles on it for the period in time in which I've had it. I started using this boot pretty extensively as of July, August of 2024. And I used it all here locally in southern Utah. I used it extensively throughout the month of September, chasing elk primarily in the state of Idaho. Very wet conditions there. And this boot was very light and very fast, as I would expect it to be, while also still being very comfortable. This boot never let me down. It was exposed to a lot of water, and I never had any leakage. So the waterproofness is really quite remarkable. No issues whatsoever. This boot caused me no pain, no discomfort. Now, if I had any shortcoming to speak to, it would be that there were some use applications that were terrain specific, where I found myself in the Lapponia III and I had a little bit more flex, kind of left to right, laterally in the ankle, than would be preferred. Now, that's not a shortcoming to the boot necessarily, because it excelled so well in all of the other terrain that I was using it in. But in those few areas, I was like, you know what? I could have a little bit more stability in that area for carrying the weight I was at the time and the terrain that I was at the time, if that makes any sense. But that's the Lapponia III.
For the Altitude, I took this boot, or I purchased it right before a big trip, and we ended up doing, I think, 26 miles over the course of 2 days, which was way too much for the shape I was in and for having a brand new boot. That being said, my experience was not quite the same as yours with the Lapponia III. I did not have 0 pain with this boot. That's a double negative. But there were a couple points where I think there could be improvements made on this boot. And the main one is going to be in that toe. And I found that it kind of pinched down on my toe, and it was less as the boot got broken in, and I've used it quite a bit since. But it still pinches on that toe every time I step in a small way, and enough to where if I'm buying a Crispi boot, there's a lot of options that are really, really comfortable. I don't think I'm going to settle for something that has a pinch point.
No.
In terms of the rest of the boot, it was comfortable. It was a little tighter in the toe box than I might have liked. Kind of right here, you might be able to see where it comes in narrow compared to the Lapponia. And I appreciate that on a technical boot, but this boot is simply too soft to be used in a technical application. I used it recently in Texas where you're walking on kind of bouldery stuff. It was mountainous, we were hunting aoudad, and my feet hurt every day after that hunt. I definitely needed a stiffer boot for that terrain, but like I said, it's not stiff enough to be a technical boot, but it's also a little narrow in the toe, and I'm not totally sure why. In terms of, comparing it to the Lapponia III, I think there's very few applications where I would take this boot over the Lapponia III. It's more expensive, it's heavier, it's less comfortable for my foot, and I think overall the Lapponia III is going to be a better fit for most people.
And having helped a lot of folks over the course of Gearful being around, personally what I've seen with customers is they have very much enjoyed the Lapponia III since its launch in spring of 2024. That being said, there are a few folks that still gravitate to the Altitude, and those are the ones that want a little bit more technical fit throughout the length of the boot. Like Brady made mention to, as you go from heel to toe, that fit and width for say a D and a D is more narrow, it's noticeably more narrow in the Altitude than it is with the Lapponia. Sometimes that works to the advantage of the user and sometimes it doesn't. With you, I'd offer it probably contributed to what you said was a pinch point in the area of the toe box.
Correct.
So it's very user specific, it's very use specific at the same time.
I will say too, the Altitude did feel like more of a boot than the Lapponia III does, so when I was trying them on and deciding between the two, I gravitated towards this one because I like a more rigid, stiffer boot feel. And this upper is going to have quite a bit more rigidity than the Lapponia III. However, again, after use, I think I would go for the Lapponia III.
For the early season stuff?
Yeah, for anything really. I don't think I would ever choose this boot. Oh, that's right. So right here on the descents, I found that this was kind of digging into my Achilles a little bit. It wasn't terrible. I've had boots that are unwearable because of that. But the Lapponia III has a stretchier, more forgiving upper fabric here. So again, that's another plus for it that I would say gives it an edge in pretty much any application.
So, should we jump into the specifications for the other models?
Let's do it.
Okay. For myself, I had the Briksdal Mtn, and I've used this extensively since its launch in spring of 2023, so 2 years now. This boot, right out of the box, I used it on a local trail 5 days in a row, going 2.5 miles up, 2.5 miles down, and 1,000 foot of vertical gain and loss on each given day. That's a lot of miles and a lot of wear right out of the box. No issues with discomfort whatsoever. That's pretty remarkable in my opinion. This boot with specifications, this is a 1 pound, 11 ounce boot per boot. It comes in at a price point of $420. It's still uninsulated, and it's a Flex 3 on the scale that is Crispi, and I feel that is appropriately labeled. Now, for the materials on the outsole, you still have the Crispi proprietary Mega Grip outsole. You do have a different midsole here than you do with some of the other models. This is the EFX midsole. This is a rubber ran, so there's a little bit of a difference there. It's not a leather ran that's poly-coated. This is a rubber ran. Where you see the gray and you would think that it's leather, it's actually not. It's a synthetic microfiber type material. And again, here's that spider looking honeycomb fabric that is called Pewtech. It's very much abrasion resistant, but that's the down and dirty on the specs for the Briksdal Mtn.
And then moving into the Briksdal Pro, I got this boot to go on a sheep hunt actually in Alberta. And again, I did not have as much time as I would have liked to break it in. I was still very happy with the performance of it. So I'll go into specs real quick. This is going to be a 1 pound, 15 ounce boot, so it's quite a bit heavier. It does have 200 grams of insulation. Price point is about $500, and the height is going to be 10 inches. The materials used are going to be a Vibram outsole, a Flex 4 midsole here. It's by density, and then you've got a rubber rand very similar to the Briksdal Mtn. The big difference between this and the Briksdal Mtn is obviously the Pro is a leather boot. So it's primarily leather with some synthetic. You'll see you have leather around the lower area all the way around. Then you have some synthetic fibers up top for ankle support. And what I like is that the tongue of these boots is actually nylon, so it's going to be a little stretchier, a little more breathable, and overall more forgiving. Both this boot and the Briksdal Mountain are complete with the Crispi ABSS system, so that is going to give you quite a bit of ankle support.
With not a lot of weight penalty.
No, it's pretty nice.
So when someone needs ankle support or the terrain dictates that ankle support should be had, ABSS is a wise choice. Testimonies. Briksdal Mountain, great boot. Full-on synthetic. I mean, in my opinion, this is the most versatile model of Crispi boot that they make. That's a bold statement, but that's my opinion. This boot is worn, so I do stand by that opinion. Now, a couple shortcomings, kind of just to speak to them, if I had to try to find some shortcomings, even though I'm very, very pleased with this boot, it is a full synthetic boot, so I was expecting to have more breathability throughout the whole boot's construction than I would experience with even the Lapponia III being a nubuck leather. I think that the breathability was limited. Possibly that's because I conditioned it with Crispi's waterproofing spray, just in anticipation of synthetic materials being lesser naturally waterproof than our leather materials. Whether that's true or not, I have no idea. All I can say is that my personal opinion is that the breathability is pretty much same between this synthetic boot and other leather boots made by Crispi that I've worn. This boot is a go-to for myself for certain use applications. If it's more technical terrain for a longer period of time, I'll go with the Briksdal Mountain over the Lapponia III. If it's a shorter period of time, I'll still go with the Lapponia III. If I'm going deeper and I'm going solo, I will often go for the Briksdal Mountain just for a little bit more insurance, if you will, to ensure that I am mitigating the risk of having an ankle injury and being in those areas by myself. So those are kind of my highlights for the Briksdal Mountain, as well as what I would say are somewhat of a shortcoming. But Briksdal Mountain testimony in my mind.
And you didn't have any issues with like the way that the toe pinched, or none of the...
I didn't. This boot was, that's a good question and a good mention. I can say that this boot was exposed. I don't know what it is about me, but these trips turned to be very wet. This went through 2 spring bear hunts. It went through a few archery hunts in September, which were pretty wet in eastern Idaho. And then also in some October applications with a little bit of snow that would melt off quickly, which makes for a very saturated and messy environment. Now, full synthetic boot, you can see that the boot, the material, you got some creasings there that just come from the natural hinging of the boot. But what I can say to kind of answer your question specifically is that no, I did not have any of the toe box, collapsing in on itself on each side like some boots do by many different manufacturers when they're exposed to moisture and then consequently dry out. So for me, no, I didn't have anything such as that.
Okay. My experience with the Briksdal Pro, like I said, I was wearing this on a sheep hunt, so we're talking a lot of elevation. It's very steep uphill and downhill each day, and pretty sharp rock too in the mountains that we were in. They definitely held up well. I mean, you can see they're in pretty good shape still. I haven't gotten a ton of use out of these, but I have put quite a few miles on them on a few different hunts and been very happy with them. In terms of a stiffer boot, it's always going to be harder to get that right fit when you increase the stiffness. You're just going to have more opportunity for pinch points, hot spots, than you will with a looser boot, such as the Briksdal Mountain. And the only spot on this boot that I had any trouble with was in the heel. And I've heard that from a couple different people. I think the heel box was a little wide for me. I was able to remedy that with an insole that lifted my heel up, and that kind of pinched the heel and held it tighter. But yeah, especially in the earlier, first few miles before breaking, or first few days actually, it felt like my heel was being pushed against the outside of the boot, the heel part, pretty hard, and there's a little bit of pain there. Now that they're broken in, and now that I have the right insoles, these boots are pretty dang killer. One thing I will mention is that the fit is going to be tighter in the same size than the Briksdal Mountain. So if you have a 10.5 and a 10.5, this boot is going to fit tighter, and I think the overall length is going to be a little bit less. Now, the reason for that, in my understanding, is that with a more technical boot, you want a tighter fit. Personally, I'm fully on board with that. However, some guys aren't. Some guys would prefer the comfortable foot over the control and agility of a boot, right? So I would recommend that if you're in between a medium and a wide, or in between a 10.5 and 11, say, go up to that 11 or go up to that wide model, because the Briksdal Pro is going to be a little bit tighter. Other mentions, it's been very waterproof. I've had zero issues with that. One thing that Austin has actually had an issue with is his toe box collapsed on his boots, and that's very common with a leather boot when they do get very wet and then dry out, especially if they dry out
Too fast.
too fast. Yeah, that toe box will collapse. People have put like cedar stays in there and different things to just keep it upright. As it dries and shrinks, it won't collapse, and that'll help. I think that's about the only con that I can say with this boot, though. I love the 10-inch height. I love the fit, the lacing system, the toe hinges really nicely for me. And again, with a stiffer boot, everything is going to be a little harder to get right, and I've been super happy with these ones.
And you're not the only one. There's a lot of folks that I've helped get into the Briksdal Pro, and I've heard very, very, very favorable reviews from them as well. So
that's what we got for today. Again, take it with a grain of salt. Everyone's foot profile is different. What we're trying to do is show you 4 of our favorite models and try and give you some personal experience with them.
And one added tool of Gearful.com when it comes to Crispi boots, and all products for that matter, is that we do have the functionality on the website to easily exchange a model of footwear, for example. So if you order one pair and it didn't fit you quite right, keeping in new conditions, obviously the exchanges are like that, and no added cost to yourselves. We cover the cost of return shipping. Or some folks will pick 2 different models in a size 10 each, and they'll see which ones they like better. And a prime example of that would be these 2 right here. Or they're on their cuff, such as Brady made mention with the Briksdal Pro, and they're like, I'm naturally a 10.5, but maybe I want to consider a size 11. Those folks often order both pairs and then very seamlessly, with no trouble, send the 1 pair back that they don't want and get a refund quickly applied. So it's a tool for you to use. Anyhow, we hope that you found this video helpful. Please like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.